You walk in the dusty streets of Karbala, passing in front of children who sell small trinkets to earn enough money to pay for their next meal. The air is filled with smoke from kitchen fires and the faraway sound of prayers echoing through the old minarets. But under this apparently ordinary scene lies a horror so deep, so systematically cruel, that it questions everything you believed you knew about human suffering and how power can corrupt what is innocent. Do you think you understand the worst that humanity can do to its most vulnerable? Do you believe that the darkest chapters of history remain closed inside dusty books? Then prepare yourself, because what you are about to discover will make the most twisted tales look like stories for children. You are about to enter the shocking world of bacha-batsi, a cruel custom so deeply rooted in Afghan society that it turns young boys into living dolls for the amusement of powerful men who hide behind religion and tradition. 9-year-old boys are forced to wear women's clothing and to dance before groups of adults, part of a structured network of exploitation protected by warlords and state officials. And this does not happen in the shadows. It takes place in full daylight, celebrated at gatherings attended by policemen, politicians, and religious leaders who are supposed to protect those very children. The facts you are about to learn will destroy everything you thought you knew about the hidden cruelty within Afghanistan. And the most terrifying truth, this is not the doing of a few individuals. It is an entire system created to consume childhood innocence and to transform purity into merchandise for the powerful. Let us begin with the most terrible truth of all. In Afghanistan, there is a saying that perfectly expresses the twisted logic behind this nightmare. Women are made for children. Boys are made for pleasure. Imagine this. You are a 9-year-old boy living in one of the poorest provinces of Afghanistan. Your family has not eaten properly in weeks. Your father is dead, killed in one of those endless wars that have torn your country apart for generations. Your mother looks at you and your brothers with eyes full of despair, knowing she cannot protect you from the hunger that tortures you every night. Then he appears, a man wearing fine clothes, with golden teeth and expensive shoes, driving a car worth more than your family will ever see. He walks up to your mother and shows her a bundle of cash larger than anything she has ever held. He is not there out of kindness. He is there to take you, to turn you into what local people call a bacha, a dancing boy who will serve his desires until you are no longer of any use to him. Bacha-batsi, literally meaning boy play in Persian, is one of the most organized forms of child exploitation still existing in today's world. And what makes it so insidious is that it does not take place secretly. It happens in the open, celebrated at events attended by policemen, government members, and clerics who should defend morality and protect these children. Boys, usually between 10 and 18 years old, are dressed as women, their faces painted, their hair arranged in complicated feminine styles. They are trained to dance, to move their bodies in ways that entertain the men who control them. But the dance is only the beginning. When the performance ends, when the crowd claps and the money changes hands, these boys are led to private rooms. And that is where the real nightmare begins. The men involved in bacha-batsi have built a complete system of excuses to justify their actions. They say it is not wrong because they do not love boys. They say it is not forbidden because they avoid women. They have created an entire belief structure that allows them to harm children while continuing to call themselves honorable men, devoted believers, and caring fathers. The recruitment process is as systematic as it is heartbreaking. Street children, orphans, and boys from the poorest families are the primary victims. Some are kidnapped from their homes or taken from the streets where they beg for food. Others are handed over by families who, crushed by hunger, accept money in exchange for their sons. They are told that the boys will receive food, shelter, and education that their parents could never afford. But behind those promises lies only suffering and despair. The most tragic part of this entire system is how it destroys the natural instinct of parents to protect their children. Mothers and fathers who would give their lives for their sons are forced to make an impossible choice, to watch them die from hunger or to give them to men who promise survival. It is a choice no parent should ever face. And yet, thousands of Afghan families live through this nightmare every single year. The boys themselves had no choice. They were helpless children trapped under the control of adults who ruled every part of their existence. They were told that being chosen was a privilege, that they should be grateful for the food and shelter they received. They were made to believe that their pain was normal, that this was simply how the world worked for boys like them. Once a child entered this world, his identity was systematically erased and rebuilt according to the desires of his master. He was given a new name, often a feminine one. He was trained to speak softly, to move gracefully, to respond to every command with obedience and gratitude. His natural development was suppressed through constant psychological pressure and fear. He became a living puppet, a possession molded to please those who viewed him not as a person, but as property. The so-called education process was harsh and complete. The boys were forced to learn specific dances, each gesture designed to emphasize obedience and fragility. They were taught to wear makeup, to style their hair, and to choose clothing that would appeal to their master's taste. They learned to read moods, to anticipate what was expected of them, to act without being told. But this conditioning went much deeper than performance. These children were broken down and rebuilt as tools of control. They were taught that their worth as human beings depended entirely on how well they served the desires of those in power. They were told that resistance was useless, that escape was impossible, that their families had abandoned them, and that society had forgotten them. Physical punishment was constant and severe. Those who disobeyed were beaten, deprived of food, or subjected to cruel treatment. They were threatened, not only with harm to themselves but also to their families still living in the country. They were shown examples of what happened to those who tried to flee, punishment so brutal that most quickly gave up any thought of escape. The abuse was systematic and relentless. It was not a few isolated incidents, but an organized pattern that could continue for years. The boys were completely dependent on their owners, sometimes even exchanged among other men or passed to new masters once they were no longer desired. The consequences were catastrophic. Many suffered permanent physical damage, chronic illness, and psychological trauma that would follow them throughout their lives. Depression, anxiety, and exhaustion became their daily reality. Some never recovered. Others simply died from neglect and the toll of constant violence. What made this system even more horrifying was how deeply it was embedded in Afghan social life. The so-called bacha-batsi gatherings were treated as social events, occasions where powerful men met to watch the boys perform and then discuss their service. High-ranking officials, police commanders, army officers, and wealthy businessmen attended these events openly. The practice became so normalized that recordings of boys dancing were sold in markets, and everyone knew what they truly represented. Many men considered participation in bacha-batsi a privilege of power, a reward that came with social status. Owning several bacha was a symbol of wealth and influence. The more boys a man controlled, the more respect he gained from his peers. It became a twisted symbol of status that turned children into commodities in a marketplace of human suffering. This normalization spread even into the justice system and law enforcement. The police rarely investigated these crimes. In some cases, they participated themselves. Courts refused to prosecute powerful men, ensuring the cycle of silence continued. Even when arrests occur, justice almost never protects the victims. It is often the children who are accused, while the men responsible remain untouched. For these boys, the damage goes far beyond the physical. They live in a constant state of fear, never knowing when they will be summoned, what will be demanded, or what punishment may follow. Over time, they learn to survive by shutting down their emotions. They hide inside themselves, separating mind from body, pretending not to feel. This is how they endure. Psychologists describe it as a state of learned helplessness, when a person becomes so conditioned to violence and control that resistance no longer seems possible. They are taught that escape is hopeless, that no one will come to help, that their families have forgotten them. Some even begin to defend their oppressors, convincing themselves that the little food and shelter they receive is something to be thankful for. But the tragedy doesn't stop there. Many of those who grow up inside this system later become part of it. Years of manipulation teach them that domination equals power, that suffering is simply how life works. And so the pattern repeats itself, victims slowly turning into the next generation of aggressors. It is a cycle of trauma that feeds on itself, ensuring that the practice never disappears. There is also a financial side behind it. For many who control these children, this is not only about power, it is about money. The boys are taken to private events, banquets, and gatherings, used to entertain the wealthy. Their exploitation becomes a business, a marketplace where innocence itself has a price. Those considered gifted or beautiful are treated as valuable assets. Their owners invest in clothes, jewelry, and lessons to make them more appealing, all to increase their worth. But the higher that worth, the greater their suffering. Every increase in value means more exhaustion, more control, and the loss of what little remains of their childhood. Many boys are passed from one owner to another, traded like property. Each transfer brings new trauma, new expectations, new rules. To survive, they learn to adapt instantly, to become whatever their new master demands, hiding their true selves deeper and deeper. Their lives follow a tragic pattern. Most are taken between 9 and 12 years old, when they are most defenseless. They are considered valuable through early adolescence, when they still look like children but have already been conditioned to obey. But as they grow older, as their faces and voices change, their value declines. They know exactly what that means. When youth fades, they will be discarded. Some are thrown into the streets with nothing. Others remain as servants or guards, kept because they know too much about the lives of their former masters. And when their captivity ends, another kind of prison begins, the prison of rejection. Society brands them forever. Even though they were victims, they are treated as outcasts, blamed for what was done to them. They cannot find work, build families, or live normal lives. The world looks at them and sees shame instead of suffering. The psychological scars run deep. Many battle depression, anxiety, and trauma that never fades. Some seek escape in addiction, trying to silence the past through alcohol or drugs. Others become distant and cold, convinced that closeness will only bring pain. And a few repeat the violence they once endured, because for them, control has become the only language they understand. For most, trust is gone forever. They were betrayed by adults who were supposed to protect them, used by those who claimed to care, and abandoned by a society that refused to see them. The destruction of trust that these children experience follows them throughout their lives. It affects every relationship they try to form, making it nearly impossible to believe in genuine kindness or to feel safe in the presence of others. The damage to their emotional and psychological development is profound. They have been conditioned to believe that their bodies do not belong to them, that their purpose is to serve the needs of others, not to express their own will. This distorted conditioning leaves deep marks on their ability to form healthy relationships. Many survivors struggle with self-perception and identity. After years of being forced to play roles that contradict who they truly are, they grow confused about their emotions, desires, and even their sense of self. They do not know whether what they feel is real, or simply a remnant of the manipulation they once endured. This inner conflict can last for decades, preventing them from understanding who they are and where they belong in the world. The educational consequences are equally devastating. Most boys involved in this system are taken away from school and stripped of any chance to learn basic skills. Instead of reading and writing, they are taught obedience, appearance, and performance, lessons designed to make them dependent and compliant. Deprived of education, they grow up without the tools to think critically or to change their situation, ensuring they remain trapped in a cycle of dependence. The medical effects of this exploitation reach far beyond visible injuries. Without access to doctors or proper care, the boys suffer from untreated illnesses, malnutrition, and trauma that is both physical and mental. Many are denied even basic medical help because they are seen not as victims, but as offenders, a cruel distortion that keeps them invisible to society. Isolation is another weapon used against them. They are cut off from their families, communities, and anyone who might offer comfort or understanding. This forced solitude creates a twisted dependency, a psychological bond between victim and abuser. Some begin to identify with those who control them, confusing fear with attachment, because human contact, even from their captors, becomes their only connection to the world. The reaction of the international community has been painfully insufficient. Trapped between cultural sensitivity and political caution, many organizations avoid direct confrontation. Western governments and NGOs fear being accused of imposing their own values on Afghan traditions. This hesitation has allowed the practice to persist in the shadows, largely untouched, while attention is focused elsewhere. Historically, this exploitation has survived through every change in power. During the first Taliban rule in the 1990s, it was officially banned and harshly punished, leading to a temporary decline. But after the fall of the Taliban in 2001, it returned, stronger and more organized, as former warlords regained influence within the new government. Many of these men had been involved in the practice during earlier wars and reintroduced it once they held positions of power again. The Taliban's return to power in 2021 created a paradox. Publicly, they banned the practice and imposed severe penalties. But numerous reports suggest that some local officials continued to exploit the system in secret. The prohibition on music and dance forced these activities underground, making them harder to detect and far more dangerous for the victims. Without the public nature of earlier gatherings, there are fewer witnesses, and almost no chance for rescue. The boys are now hidden in private compounds and remote areas, cut off from any possible help. At the same time, Afghanistan's economic collapse has made families even more desperate. With aid suspended and jobs disappearing, many parents face an unbearable choice: watch their children starve, or give them away to men who promise food and shelter. As poverty deepens, the number of boys drawn into this system has grown, even as the practice becomes more secretive. And the psychological control it creates is so strong that many never recover, even decades after freedom. They carry the trauma in their bodies, their minds, and their relationships. Some internalize the violence, believing that power means domination. Others retreat completely from the world, unable to trust or to connect. Perhaps the most devastating truth of all is that this practice doesn't just destroy individuals. It poisons entire communities. It erodes compassion, reshapes culture, and teaches generation after generation that power is measured not by kindness, but by control. When a society begins to normalize the exploitation of its children, it loses its moral foundation. It creates a world where dignity becomes something negotiable, where power replaces compassion, and where the most vulnerable are treated not as human beings, but as objects to be used and discarded. The boys who survive this system often describe the experience as a kind of death, followed by a rebirth into a different, broken version of themselves. They learn to detach their minds from their bodies, to live in a state of emotional distance that helps them survive what no child should ever endure. But that survival comes with a terrible cost. Many spend the rest of their lives feeling disconnected from who they are, unable to fully return to a sense of self or belonging. And this cycle has not ended. Continues right now at this very moment. Somewhere in Afghanistan, a 9-year-old boy is being dressed up and forced to perform before men who see him not as a person, but as entertainment. Somewhere else, a family is making an impossible choice: to give up their son rather than watch him die of hunger. And somewhere, a grown man, once one of those boys, is trying to rebuild his life from the ruins of a stolen childhood he never got to understand. This is the reality of bacha-batsi. It is not an ancient custom preserved in the pages of history. It is a living nightmare that still consumes the lives of Afghan children while much of the world looks away. These boys are not statistics or distant case studies. They are human beings, children who deserve protection, education, and the simple right to grow up without fear. Instead, they were born into a system built to break them, to shape them into tools of pleasure and obedience for those who should have been their protectors. But the tragedy of bacha-batsi is not only what it does to the boys themselves. It is also what it reveals about the society that allowed such horror to exist, to spread, and to be silently accepted. It shows us that when systems collapse, when corruption replaces justice, and when the powerful place their desires above human dignity, it is always the weakest who pay the price. These children deserved better. They deserved a world where childhood means safety, not fear, where boys can grow up without being turned into living symbols of suffering, and where power means protection, not exploitation. Until that world exists, the nightmare will go on. devouring young lives generation after generation. The story of these boys is not just the shame of one country. It is the shame of humanity itself, a reminder of how far we still have to go before we can truly say that every child is safe from those who would destroy their innocence.